So as you undoubtedly know, if you watch the show at all, let alone watch it regularly, I do a great deal of reporting on the trends in the West, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, about online censorship, about state, and working hand in hand with large corporations, large tech corporations to censor political speech on the internet, the primary means that we use now to communicate. So I just spent an hour walking through what's happening in Europe. It's something I do regularly, and so I'm pretty accustomed to reading some pretty shocking things that I think are genuinely alarming, including what I just went through, the kind of attitude and mentality of the EU and the way they're armed now with this new law. And yet, despite how kind of immunized I think I am to being viscerally shocked, I was amazed when somebody sent me a couple of days ago this press release from the government of Canada that in very clear and unvarnished terms ordered any platforms that allow podcasts that make a certain small revenue cutoff a year, something like $10 million, to register with the government of Canada. Register with the government of Canada to allow a new regulatory agency or an old regulatory agency applying a new law to ensure that the content of these podcasts and the platform comports with Canadian law. So first, let me show you what the government itself said. Here's the press release. I posted this on Twitter over the weekend. It went super viral because of how disturbing it is, how obviously disturbing it is. So here's the headline. The CRTC takes major step toward modernizing Canada's broadcasting framework. The CRTC is the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission. So don't worry. Podcast platforms are required to modernize, to register, but it's only because they want to modernize their regulatory framework, not because they want to control the flow of information. You don't need to worry. Here's what they said, quote, "Today the CRTC is advancing its regulatory plan to modernize Canada's broadcasting framework and ensure online streaming services make meaningful contributions to Canadian and Indigenous content. First, the CRTC is setting out which online streaming services need to provide information about their activities in Canada. Online streaming services that operate in Canada, offer broadcasting content, and earn $10 million or more in annual revenues will need to complete a registration form by November 28, 2023. Registration collects basic information, is only required once, and can be completed in just a few steps. Second, the CRTC is setting conditions for online streaming services to operate in Canada. These conditions take effect today and require certain online streaming services to provide the CRTC with information related to their content and subscribership. So not only do you have to report the fact that you're operating in Canada, you also have to provide the CRTC, the Canadian agency, with, quote, information related to your content and subscribership. The decision also requires those services to make content available in a way that is not tied to a specific mobile or internet service. Quick facts, quote, social media services must register, however, users do not. Online services that offer podcasts must register. However, individuals who use social media to share podcasts do not. Online services that only provide video game services or audiobooks do not have to register, obviously because those don't contain political content the way podcasts do. Now, all of this is being done pursuant to a new law that Canada has. We went over the law that the EU has last week. We reported on the new law the UK has to empower the governments to control the content of information. As I said at the top of the show, this new law, the Canadian law, which is referred to as C11, it's the Online Streaming Act, is not a law that if you just read it would be as explicitly disturbing as the one in the EU or the UK or pending in other countries like Brazil that are soon going to likely be adopted. It seems more benevolent on the surface. But the key context for this is two things. Number one, there's no question that the government does have the power to regulate the content that these streaming services are offering. And number two, the Canadian government has demonstrated repeatedly that it has authoritarian tendencies, to put that mildly. And that's the reason why people are so alarmed when the Canadian government seeks to exert power over the expression of political speech. Here's from the CBC when the law was first enacted on April 28, 2023. Controversial bill to regulate online streaming becomes law. Quote, a controversial government bill to overhaul Canadian broadcasting laws to regulate streaming services has passed the final hurdle in the Senate and received royal assent Thursday evening. The legislation requires streaming services such as Netflix and Spotify to pay to support Canadian media content like music and TV shows. It also requires the platforms to promote Canadian content. Specifically, the bill says, quote, online undertakings shall clearly promote and recommend Canadian programming in both official languages as well as in Indigenous languages. The change gives the CRTC, Canada's broadcast regulator, broad powers over digital media companies, including the ability to impose financial penalties for violations of the Act. Conservatives slammed the bill as an attack on freedom of expression. Quote, under this archaic system of censorship, government gatekeepers will now have the power to control which videos, posts, and other content Canadians see online, a conservative webpage on C11 says. Here from the Toronto Star that same week when it was enacted, April 27th, Ottawa's controversial online streaming bill becomes law despite protests from digital giants. Quote, the Liberals introduced the bill early last year in an attempt to subject streaming giants like Netflix, Disney Plus, and Spotify to the same regulations that already apply to traditional television and radio broadcasters in Canada. The reason why that makes no sense, unless you want to control content, is because the internet is infinite. Whereas traditional television and radio broadcasters occupy finite space. They've always been subject to regulations. The internet is infinite. Unless you're trying to control content, the kinds of things Canadians can and can't hear, there'd be no reason to have this bill. Quote, in introducing C11, Rodriguez sought to refresh Canada's outdated Broadcasting Act, which was crafted in the days long before Canadians relied heavily on the internet to access TV shows, movies, and music. To do that, the bill carves out a new class of broadcasting called, quote, online undertakings, which share content on the internet, including in some cases social media platforms. The bill also calls on streaming services to contribute to the promotion of Canadian content on their platforms, and it would give this agency broad powers to enforce the act, including the ability to penalize platforms that violate it. Precisely what those powers will be and how the newly passed legislation will impact Canadians' experience with consuming content online has yet to be determined. It was also backed by the NDP and the Quebec Bloc Party. That left only the Conservatives to campaign against the bill, and the Conservative leader referred to the law as Justin Trudeau's censorship law. The official opposition argued C11 overreached in what it captured under the proposed regime, handed the CRTC too much power and control, and unduly interfered with what kinds of content Canadians would be able to find online. Now, there has been, as I said, a lot of confusion deliberately generated by the government because the government and Justin Trudeau is putting on his nice voice and saying, we don't want to interfere in free speech in Canada. We just want to promote Canadian content and Indigenous content. That's all we're trying to do. And they insisted the law doesn't really allow them to dictate to social media companies what gets algorithmically promoted or suppressed. And yet, when the CRTC chairman, Ian Scott, went to testify, he admitted that the bill can be used to pressure internet platforms to manipulate algorithms. Here from an article by a law professor in Canada, Michael Geist, you see the headline that the CRTC chair admitted they can use it to pressure internet platforms. And the article reads, quote, the government has insisted that algorithms are off limits in the bill. For example, Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez told the House Heritage Committee, now other people will say, oh my God, you're going to play with algorithms. No, it's clearly written there that the CRTC cannot play with algorithms. Lots of things are said about the bill that have nothing to do with the bill. The commission may not tell the platform specifically how to adjust the algorithm, but that is a distinction without a difference, since it can issue orders on the end result as it is presented to subscribers or users. In other words, he admitted in this video I'm about to show you that they absolutely have the power to regulate and control which videos get promoted, which videos get suppressed. So this is the CRTC chair, Ian Scott. Let's play this video.
And I think there will be a number of ways that the industry can do it. I'll give you simple examples. Instead of saying, and the act precludes this, we will make changes to your algorithms, as many European countries are contemplating doing. Instead, we will say, this is the outcome we want. We want Canadians to find Canadian music. How best to do it? How will you do it? I don't want to use to manipulate your algorithm. I want you to manipulate it to produce a particular outcome.
Oh, wow, what a difference. So it's not the Canadian regulators who actually go in and recode the algorithms. They just tell the social media companies, this is the outcome we want. These are the videos we want promoted, these are the videos we want suppressed, and you are now to go change your algorithms to ensure compliance with our orders. Did that sound reassuring to you at all? That's them trying to make the law sound benign. And of course, I was just on Laura Ingraham. I did a segment on this issue in Canada. I taped it right before our program began. It's probably just appeared live 15 minutes ago or so at the end of her program at 7 o'clock, which is on the same time as our show. And one of the points I made was, look, no government ever stands up and says, we're authoritarians, we're tyrants, we're here to take away your right of free speech and right of dissent. They all present it in this benevolent way, like, oh, we're just trying to protect you. We're trying to keep you safe from hate speech. We're trying to protect you from the dangers of disinformation. We're just trying to promote Canadian art. But the minute they have the power to dictate to social media companies which content gets promoted and which content gets suppressed, as the CRTC chair, Ian Scott, admitted in that video I just showed you that they do have, obviously the dangers of censorship are immense, especially when they're ordering platforms that offer podcasting, which is overwhelmingly political in content, to register with the state to be subject to the dictates of their regulators. Here is an article from the same law professor, Michael Geist, and the reason I'm showing you his analysis is because he's extremely kind of moderate. He's much less concerned about this law, for example, than I am or than free speech advocates in Canada are. He's come out and kind of defended the government in a way, saying critics of this law are wildly overstating the dangers when they say that Canada has become China. And yet, nonetheless, he does acknowledge that there are real censorship dangers to this law and that the government is not being honest about the sorts of powers it gives them. So here he is in an article. This is Michael Geist with the University of Ottawa Law School in March of 2023. And there's the article headline, "The Latest Bill on the C11 Debate, Sacrificing Freedom of Expression for Quebec Culture Lobby Support." And this is what he wrote, quote, "As I've stated many times, the bill does not limit the ability to speak, but could impact the ability to be heard. That raises important implications for freedom of expression, but it does not turn Canada into China. To the claims that user content regulation is excluded from the bill, which is what the government is trying to claim, we can't control content regulation, user content regulation. The law professor, who, as I said, is pretty moderate, says Section 4.12b and Section 422 clearly scope such content into the bill, an interpretation that has been confirmed by dozens of experts and the former chair of the CRTC. Liberal and NDP MP claims to the contrary should be regarded as disinformation, a deliberate attempt to spread false information. Indeed, the Supreme Court proposed a fix. The government rejected it. That was supposed to be the focus of the debate, yet Liberal MPs falsely claim that there is no there there." So the people who are saying they need to protect you from disinformation and they need this censorship power to do it are themselves, according to this mildly pro-government or at least government-defending law professor, themselves spreading disinformation, which of course is exactly what they're going to do. Here he is in March 27th, right before the bill was passed, referencing a claim by an MP who favored the bill, saying that her claims are deeply troubling and explains a lot. And I want to show you what she said. This is the Quebec Bloc Party member justifying this bill and how it will be used by the Canadian government.
If violating freedom of expression means ensuring that Quebec content is well represented online, well, then that's worth it.
Look at this woman here in the left. Let me show this video again. In this left
Quebec content
corner, the woman with the brown hair sitting down to the speaker's right, as she says, "Look, if we have to limit and violate freedom of expression in order to get what we want, which is the content that we want promoted, so be it." Watch that how that other MP reacts when she says it.
means ensuring that Quebec content is well represented online, well, then that's worth it.
I can't count how many examples I now see of Western politicians doing this, meaning, look, we're being accused of violating freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and you know what? So be it. We are doing that. Because the dangers of allowing free speech are too great, and the importance of us controlling the flow of information is too high, that we don't care any longer about these complaints. We're admitting we're limiting free speech. We are limiting free speech. We want to limit free speech. Free speech is too dangerous. That is absolutely the prevailing view of these Western neoliberal power centers. And you may be comforted by the fact that we, at least in the United States, have the First Amendment. For a while I was too. But what the EU is saying, and they're in touch with the Americans all the time, is what their plan is, knowing that they have this First Amendment problem in the US, is to force these companies to change their policies to restrict freedom of speech online, to ensure that the censorship demands of Western liberals are honored and obeyed. And then these companies will have no choice except to ensure those limitations also apply to the United States. And free speech all throughout the West will be curbed and violated and limited over the primary technological means we now use to communicate with one another, which is the internet. And the reaction when you say this is no longer to deny it, because it's no longer feasible to deny it. It's to do what those two politicians just did. Yep. We're violating free speech. We're limiting your free speech because the goals we have are more important. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.